Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith. Though some politicians treat recreational marijuana in Pennsylvania as an inevitability, others remain skeptical. They warn that social costs of drug use don't disappear and a legalized industry brings problems of its own. Still, elected officials consider reforms even if they oppose full-on legalization. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Anthony Hennon. So, Anthony, you've covered a lot of this issue for years now at the Center Square, but what is this newest step towards legalization that is coming through the House?
Yeah, so, if you've been watching the House Health Committee recently, you'll see a handful of hearings just focused on marijuana recreational legalization. And this has ranged from how other states in Canada have approached doing this to criminal justice reform concerns, how to probably regulate the drug. There's been a long-running series on this. And ever since Governor Shapiro took office, he has essentially assumed that recreational marijuana would be legalized and they can count on that tax revenue to come in. But that is not yet a done deal. Among Democrats, it seems like there's majority support for doing this, but they kind of break down into two camps. One is sort of the Shapiro camp, where it's focused on legalizing it as a source of tax revenue. And the other camp is kind of looking at this as the French-Canadian model, where in Quebec, they essentially sell this out of state-controlled stores. It's not really a revenue generator, but it covers basically some of the social programs they put in place as a result of legalization to deal with addiction or social harms. And so in Pennsylvania, that would look like basically what we do now with alcohol, where state-owned, state-controlled stores sell everything, and you deal with that, which is a rare model in the United States anymore. But those are kind of the two camps on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, there's much more skepticism about this. We have seen some interesting moments, like the Warren County District Attorney has come out in support of marijuana legalization and has faced some repercussions for that. But there's still, there's a mixture here. And one way, even when we have Republicans who are reticent to embrace recreational legalization, they're still looking into some sorts of reforms. So we've seen this in Representative Paul Schimmel, who's on the House Health Committee. He's proposing a bill to change marijuana possession from being a misdemeanor to a summary offense, which basically removes the threat of jail time, but you get civil fines and various ways like that. When I was talking with Schimmel, he said, in my conversations with DAs and judges, all of them have said no one's going to prison for possession of small amounts of marijuana. Reducing the offense, making it a summary offense, if there's an issue with policing where there's these transactions in public places, it still gives police a tool to use to move these things out of the streets, but not be so punitive. So we're basically looking at a way of, it's already kind of de facto in Pennsylvania. If you have a little bit of marijuana on you, you're not facing much jail time. You're not facing really heavy repercussions unless you're, carrying a lot of it. That's leading them to suspect you're going to sell it or you're involved in, some bigger problems here. But that doesn't mean that policing is going to disappear. Even with states that have legalized marijuana for recreational use, there's still a large illicit market. And there's still a need for policing to really, enforce these standards, enforce the boundaries that have been set up. So it's not really, there's bigger problems here at stake, right? It's not just a policing thing. It's not just, we changed the law, there's no social cost or there's no problems involving policing. It all goes away. That's not quite true. In Pennsylvania, we're really seeing politicians wrestle with what this is going to look like in the future.
And Schimmel and other critics, too, are concerned about mission creep and things that they've seen happen with other programs and decisions we've made in the last couple of years, such as related to skill games and medical marijuana. So can you get into a little bit more about what exactly he means by mission creep?
Yeah, I mean, this sort of broadly applies to, the vice industry, be it drugs, be it alcohol, cigarettes, gambling. There's this problem where when they kick this off, there's always this argument that, it's going to be heavily regulated, carefully regulated. It's going to be limited. There's only going to be a few sites. But when you do get this industry established and when you do have the state relying on that tax revenue, things tend to expand. Schimmel was basically explaining how the industry constantly will come back to them and say, we're bringing money for you, but we're starting to lose money or not make any more. So we need to expand either more sites out there or more licenses, what have you. You see this with the debate over skill games right now, where established casinos are coming in and really trying to push the legislature to crack down on skill games. And so there's pros and cons to that. But Schimmel's basic argument here is it never stays limited. It always grows. There's always this hunger for more, either the ability to market or to sell more products, or really pushing this angle of, this is more tax revenue coming into the state to do good things with. So why oppose this? So, how he was arguing this with gambling, he said, be careful of the state becoming financially dependent upon addictive behaviors. Most people go into a casino, they enjoy blackjack, then they leave and they had a good time. But it's not an insignificant number of people at the casino who go in alone, sit at the stool, and spend the little money they have at a slot machine. Is that good for society? The state rationalizes this because if we don't do it, we're missing out on this tax revenue. We become financially dependent on an industry that we know does harm to people. So his big argument here is, you can't ignore the harms that come by this, or you can't ignore the people who, when these things become legalized, become normalized, they suffer. You have to think about, how do you deal with these problems? How do you help these people? How do you make society better? And I think that's been a really powerful argument on a lot of the skepticism toward marijuana legalization, of people are not thinking the median person here benefits from this, or their life becomes better for it. There's a lot of legislators, a lot of activists or policy people out there making the point of, this is not just a win-win. This is something that, even in a legal situation, there's problems we'll have to deal with.
Anthony, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Freedom, individualism, limited government. On these issues, conservatives and libertarians generally agree. But where do we disagree? Check out the Future of Freedom podcast for civil, reasoned conversations about some of today's most pressing topics. It's not a debate. Our goal is to provide the best arguments from either side of an issue. Then you decide. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you find your podcasts.